So just a civics lesson right now. When we vote for the president and the vice president of the United States, we're not actually voting for those two people. We're actually voting for slates of electors who we hope are going to go vote on our behalf for the person that we select. And so that's what we refer to when we refer to the Electoral College. It's not actually, it's not really a thing, it's more of a process. And it's these electors, not us, who go on and they actually elect the president for us. So the Constitution assigns each state a number of electors based off of their representation in the House and the Senate. So, you know, each state gets 2 electors from their 2 Senate seats, and then the rest are apportioned out based on their seats in the House off of the population size. And that's adjusted every 10 years with the US Census to account for migration or, you know, moving within the states and all of that. So when you total all of them up, plus the 3 electors that the 23rd Amendment gives Washington, D.C., you have 538 total electors. And so to be to win the nomination, you know, to be elected the president, you have to win the majority of those, which is 270 votes. So when you know, when we go to vote, before that happens in a party convention, and it's kind of decided by the states, the political parties nominate their electors to go and vote on our behalf. So these are the elector candidates that we have that we're actually voting for. The election is held on Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And in most states, voters cast a single vote for these slates of electors. So if we go back to last year's election, you have a slate of electors that are you know, suited up to vote for Donald Trump, and then a slate of electors that were suited up to vote for President Biden. And you know, the majority of our popular votes picks which slate of electors actually gets to go and choose the president. And this is what's known as a winner-take-all system. This wasn't built into the Constitution, but we're going to talk about how we got to the winner-take-all system here in a little bit. And electors assemble in their respective states on Monday after the second Wednesday in December, which was December 14th. They're pledged and expected, but not required necessarily to vote for the candidates that they represent. They can vote for another candidate, and they're known as faithless electors. They haven't swung an election, but it has happened in the past. And separate ballots are cast for both the president and the vice president. And then after that, the Electoral College dissolves for another 4 years. And the votes are counted and certified by a joint session of Congress, which is held on the date January 6th, which is now a date that we're not going to forget anytime soon. But that's the date they come and gather. And if no candidate receives a majority, the president is elected by the House and the vice president is elected by the Senate, which is known as the contingent election process. So obviously, this is just a perfect system. That's exactly the way that we expect it to work. If we were to design a system that would, you know, lead to a president being selected, we couldn't have done anything more perfect than that. It makes perfect sense. It's very, very easy to understand. You know, I don't understand what the confusion is. Now I can't see anyone, but that's a big joke. That's me being sarcastic. Of course, it's just crazy to think that that's the way that we do things. So just a little bit of a background of how we got the Electoral College in the first place. We have to go pretty far back. So the Constitutional Convention was put in place to solve the problems that our first type of government, the Articles of Confederation, you know, put forth in 1781 when the Articles of Confederation went into place. The Articles of Confederation was a much weaker form of government, and it was designed that way on purpose. And it's also the place where the name, the United States of America, was first originally written. And they chose that name for a reason. You know, we tend to say the word state and we just take it for granted. So when I say the word state, you might think of Indiana, Delaware, California, New York. But you know, for hundreds of years, and to political scientists and historians alike, when we say the word state, we don't actually mean Indiana, Maryland, Delaware. What we're actually referring to is a sovereign independent nation. And it was called the Articles of Confederation because a confederacy is a union of independent nations. So we can kind of swap some words around and play with this a little bit and you know, exchange synonyms. And the United States of America, when it was put into effect, you know, means the united independent countries of this region that we call America. And the Articles of Confederation were designed to reflect that sentiment. So the government was inherently weak under the Articles of Confederation. Congress didn't have the power to levy taxes. There was no enforcement mechanism for national legislation. There was no ability to regulate foreign and interstate commerce. States could tax one another. They could coin their own money. They were, in effect, independent countries. And there were a number of problems that came along with this, a number of collective action problems. You couldn't raise a standing army. The country couldn't really defend itself, and it couldn't grow strong at all. So the issue of the Constitutional Convention was to strengthen the government. So the heart of all of this, and the heart of all of these constitutional debates, was the issue of trading state sovereignty for a stronger national government. The process would resolve all these collective action problems that plagued the states under the Articles of Confederation, but it would also open up the possibility of a centralized government hundreds of miles away, interfering in affairs that were once entirely within the domain of states. Things like printing money, things like federal regulation of taxes and commerce, and more importantly for the South, regulation of slavery. This is something they were very, very afraid of. So this new Constitution, this US Constitution, was going to completely abolish the system under the Articles of Confederation and replace it with this new government that stripped the states of some, but not all, but some of their sovereignty and give it to this centralized government. And once you give up power, it's very, very difficult to give it back. So this is a very weighty process and a very weighty, deliberate debating system that these delegates had to go through when creating this government. So the ensuing debates over the structure of the Constitution revolved exactly around how much power these vastly different states in different geographic regions and in different populations and sizes would give up, how much they would retain, and how the differences between states and how the differences between states and the national government were going to work out. So regarding the legislature, which was Article 1 of the Constitution, state sovereignty and the popular will of a national union were reflected in the creation of the House and the Senate. The House reflects the popular will of the people due to its proportional representation. So bigger states have bigger power. And they also have 2-year term limits, which is supposed to capture the popular will of the people, as it ebbs and flows across the years. The Senate represents the bastion of state sovereignty. So each state gets 2 seats. So Wyoming has as much power as the state of California. They're not all reelected at once, and they serve terms of 6 years. And so they're supposed to act as a stabilizer on the popular will, as a brake, if you will, on the will of the public. Moving to the executive branch, relatively speaking, the process of deciding on the presidency, the necessity of it, as well as the scope of his powers, was relatively easy compared to how to actually choose the president. The existing executives, the colonial governors, either held positions based off of some sort of hereditary process or were largely chosen by state legislatures. So in effect, they weren't very powerful, and the different colonial state legislatures were the ones that held a lot of the power. The founders wanted an independent branch, and they wanted it to draw its power from its own source of the people. They didn't want it to be subservient to the legislature. So how do we choose it? Well, a popular vote was suggested, but the framers were worried how they were going to pull that off across large swaths of territory. This was a big problem back then. Would the people really identify with a national candidate, hundreds of miles away? How you can't in Georgia, you can't live stream a presidential debate, back in 1796, for example. So, thinking about this logically, could we really identify with a candidate that we'll never, ever, ever hear speak, probably in our lifetime, and maybe see a portrait of? Plus, there was an issue of centralized voting with the federal government. They were worried that it could, be open to manipulation. Another big issue was the one of slavery. So the 3/5 compromise was this big compromise between the North and the Southern states, and it gave Southerners an advantage in the House of Representatives. And this is because under the 3/5 compromise, slaves counted as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of allotting seats in the House. So what slavery did is it artificially inflated the population of white property-owning males in the South, and thus their ability to influence national legislation. A national popular vote would not benefit the South in any way. As a matter of fact, it would be likely the North that would be choosing the presidents. So in order to weave all these compromises together that were already put into place, a committee of 11 was formed, and they came up with this idea of an electoral system with electors. Each state would be entitled to a number of electors equivalent to its total membership in Congress, which was going to be a reflection of the compromises between the big states and the small states, as well as the compromises between the northern states and the southern states. The state legislatures would be in charge of determining how the electors are chosen. So there's this a little bit of an overlap between the public gets to choose the electors, but then also the state retains the right to choose the presidency. The electors were going to meet in the state capitals on the same day to cast their ballots, which thwarts this centralized plan of deviousness and manipulating elections. And then if there's no majority of electors, the Senate chooses, but it was changed to the House after the Committee of 11. So the Constitution was this gigantic compromise amongst the states. It was this big political process. And the Electoral College is just another piece of this compromise. And that's how it got to where it is. And that's why it's the system that was voted on. It's not anyone's best choice, but it's the choice that everyone could agree on. And it didn't work out the way that the founders actually intended for it to work out. And to be honest, the founders didn't really know how it was going to work out. Any issue they kind of thought would be resolved through the constitutional amendment process. They were also pretty certain that the Constitution was an improvement on the document of the Articles of Confederation. So let's just kind of go with this system. And another thing they knew is that, no matter what system we had in place, we're pretty sure that George Washington's going to be the president. And some figured that he was going to serve the president for his lifetime, to be this stabilizing force within the executive branch. And that didn't turn out to be true as well. He did become the president, but not for multiple terms. So they just kind of figured that, this is the system we'll put in place. It'll be George Washington, and then we'll just kind of see how it turns out. Very, very smart people, but also very, very human people. What they fundamentally missed was the future of the national party system and its complete domination over American politics, including its domination over the electoral system that we have today. This includes their control of the electoral process and this evolution to the general ticket. Neither of these developments were the things that the founders wanted or foresaw, yet the founding fathers actually played an active role in some of these things.